How do we get from this to this? Let me show you. Hello everyone, Akvi here, and welcome to Aurora Wisps of the Northern Lights. This is a new library that I've released with Smokestack Sounds, which is Oliver Patrice Vader's new sample library company. This has been months of work, so let me show you what it's about. When you boot up the instrument, this is what you're greeted by. What if I told you there are 7 sliders in this UI? When I first pitched this to Oliver, his first question was, I wonder if I can turn on the lights. And so in Aurora, you have 7 different houses with specific sounds that you can control and mix in volume to your liking. This video isn't meant to be a super deep dive into what Aurora is because Oliver has done a wonderful showcase video on Smokestack Sound's new YouTube channel, so do go check that out. But I do want to share a little bit about these sounds and how I sampled them, how I processed them, and also how I designed this UI that you see here today. So for house number 1, we have Cello, Legno, tratto, Jittery longs. And this is how I sampled them. And this is what they are now. And notice what happens when I play the first few notes and why this instrument is named the way that it is. Next up we have these wavy voice longs, and I sampled this by singing long notes, but instead of singing like a simple ooh, I did a little at the beginning of it, so and then with the processing you get something like this. House number 3 is another cello layer, but this time a very soft and wavy long. And this is what it sounds like. And keeping with the pattern that I've just realized now, you get cello, voice, cello, voice. And so this is a hyper-processed vocal thing that I did. And so the sampling part of this was relatively simple. I had a long note, which I then processed once and twice. And then I added some beat repeat onto the original sample. And then added a bunch of LFOs here inside of Kontakt as well. This is what House 4 sounds like. Next up we have house number 5, and this actually has 2 different sounds. And let me show you what it sounds like in context with the instrument already. Check it out. This is probably one of my favorite sounds in this library, and I can actually show you what the 2 sounds are because I decided to include them separately in the Kontakt instrument. So if you check out house 5A and 5B, I can check the mapping editor, and I can see here that we have glass. And then for 5B we have harmonics. And so house 5A is glass hits, paired with guitar harmonics. So they're very similar in tone, and this is also why I wanted to pair them together. The nylon strings offered this sort of like earthy bed for then the shimmering bells to ring through, and so I really like that combination. The penultimate house is once again divided into 2 layers, both of the same instrument this time, which is a Dizi, which is a beautiful Chinese flute that has a little bit of a bamboo strip covering the sound hole, and so it gives you this wonderful resonant and buzzy sound that sounds beautiful. This is what it sounds like in the instrument. And so once again, 2 textures, this time same instrument, and we have one that's more distant and far off, and this is what it sounds like on its own. And then a second one that's a lot grittier and a lot more textured. And so when you combine them, you get something like this. And finally, the 7th house is to bring a little bit of balance to the sound of the instrument. We have a lot of ambient sounds here with slow attack and slow release. And so the final house aims to give you a little help in shaping your sound. And these are these lovely flute and voice attacks. Sampled like this. These are really cool because then you can actually play some melodies with the instrument, but if you pair it up with a few sounds here, you get a little bit of shape to your chords, which is lovely. So I feel this house really ties everything together in this instrument because you have the rest of the village that's doing very slow ambient sounds, but then this final house ties it together by allowing you to have some definition and even some melodies in your playing, which I think is really cool. Now, before we get into the processing part, I want to share a couple of quick geeky details about this instrument with you guys. So first of all, if you push up the mod wheel, you have this wonderful effect of the rest of the lights of the village turning on. And what this is doing is adding a ton of reverb and a bit of saturation at the end of the scale. So without, and with. So if you check out the effects, here on the wet and dry signal of the reverb, when I push the mod wheel, you can see that the wet sound goes up to a point, and then it slows down. And then you have the dry signal, which goes down by just a bit. And then you have some saturation, which again is only triggered by the last 40% of CC1, and it goes up to 60%. Like so. And paired with this, these Kontakt instruments all have a logo on the top left corner. And right now you can see it says Smokestack Sounds there on the top. And a nice cool detail is that that's actually a part of what CC1 is doing. So if I move the CC1 again, you can see that it does a little animation of Smokestack Sounds logo fading in as an aurora, which is, I think, is really nice. Another cool thing is that as you play something, you can see that the notes of the keyboard change color. And then when you release them, they sort of like aurora out. So if you do a bunch of them in a row, this looks like this. You can also shift click or control click the houses to turn them off very quickly. And then at the bottom here on the right, you have these little dots here. When you click them, You get the credits, which is nice, and then you click away to get rid of it. And then on the left, you have something here called mode, or playing mode. And this is where you can set how you want to play the instrument. And so you have CC11 plus velocity, which is CC11 controlling all of the volume, but then velocity also having a big impact on how the sound sounds. And then you have velocity only, which does what it says on the tin. And then CC11 priority is once again CC11 doing the majority of the heavy lifting, and velocity having a tiny bit of a weight in how the sound works. Now I'd like to take a little bit of time to share some of the work that went into getting these sounds from raw recordings to then being in Aurora. Let's check it out. Cycles did a lot of heavy lifting in this project, and I'd like to show you how the glass sounded inside of Cycles. So you can see that there are some random parameters here, and then some moving parameters like the position, which follows the waveform back and forth as you play, which is really nice. At one point of the project, we were also going to have one of the houses be a big 2-liter plastic bottle that I blew across. And so that gave us really nice sound that I might actually use for something else, but this is what it sounded like. At one point, the Dizi actually featured the regular playing mode instead of just the overblown thing that I did. And so in this version, you really get the buzziness of the bamboo strip that's on the Dizi when you play it regularly, and you get a totally different sound. And among other bits and bobs that I did to the sound, these types of adjustments and these types of random parameters here in Cycles is mainly what shaped and helped me create this sounds that you hear in Aurora. Now, for the design process. This was what Aurora first looked like in the first demo that I did, with totally different sounds as well. You might recognize that the houses are pretty much the same from the final UI, but the composition of the image is totally different, and even the Aurora style is slightly different as well. And my main issue with this original picture and this original framing is that we don't have a lot of space for the Aurora here to do its thing, and it's also a little bit off-center, so I didn't quite enjoy that. I really wanted something like the sky doing this or being framed by mountains or something, and the Aurora could have center stage here. And then we see here that the village is also way off to one side, and I really wanted it to be a lot more centered and more well organized for the instrument. And so now, welcome to After Effects. This is where I do all of my design work for UIs and for instruments and all that kind of stuff. And I'm going to take you layer by layer how I sort of, created this UI based on this wonderful picture. So, first of all, we have the base village here, as you can see. And so I wanted to fix two things primarily. The framing, the whole mountain cutout not being centered, and the fact that the village itself is way off to the side, and one of the houses here you can see is like totally chopped off. And so the first thing that I did for this new version is I cut out the mountain, because that wasn't doing me any favors. And then because this is supposed to be a nighttime scene, these shadows here don't make much sense, so I had to remove them a little bit and also reduce some of the glare of the sunshine on that little roof there. Next, this left part of the village here is also a bit of a problem because the houses are all bunched up together. And so if there's supposed to be different sliders controlling everything when it's all on top of each other and overlapping is a bit of an issue. So I decided I would like to change the red house with the white house. And then I needed to tweak some of the things because this one fits rather nicely over there. This one is, not as big. So I decided to extend it a little bit and then needed a few more windows because it would be nice to get more of a lighting thing going on when you activate the slider. But you might see that we have an issue here where the village is not big enough. So I did sort of like a bunch of clone stamping and different masking processes here to extend the image as far as I could. And then finally, when you piece everything together, this is what we're left with. And then we do a little bit of color grading to change the contrast of the image. And then we turn it to nighttime, like so. Lovely. And then we have the individual house lights, which are done exactly as you'd probably expect them to be done. So if I show this here, these are all individual shapes and masks and all of that kind of stuff. And then basically they're all this disgusting yellow color. When you get into it, you have a little bit of a blur going on so that you don't have super sharp edges on these windows that aren't super sharp in the original image anyway. And then you have some glow, which is what actually gives it the nice little warm tones here. And then for the pièce de résistance of this entire thing, we have this wonderful thing. And this is what the Aurora looks like. So if I play it a little bit, you can see that it's just a bunch of fractal noises. So this is like 68 layers of fractal noise, which are then set into a sort of a 3D space and then go like this. And then you have a control layer here where you can control how the Aurora looks like. So what kind of colors do you want? Do you want them to get more purple? Or do you want them to be a lot more green and stuff like that? And this is where I decided to park it. I wanted to get those beautiful teals just over the greens on the bottom, and I wanted to almost reach full purple at the top. Then you also have this wonderful tool here where I can make it so the Aurora either goes a lot farther up or it stays more compact like so. I can do a little bit of color variance and basically how fast it changes from one color to the next. And then the opacity slider tells you how far the Aurora will go. So if I do 5, it gets much shorter. But then if I do something like 0, it goes forever. And so I set it at 2, which I felt was a happy medium to also not get too bogged down in the top of the instrument there. It also has a little bit of a directional blur so that you don't see the individual stacked layers of fractal noise. And so when you turn that back on, you get a nice little clean, smooth finish to the Aurora effect. And then if you pay attention, you get some moving stars in the background of the final instrument as well. And so basically in terms of the UI and the visuals and all that kind of stuff, what the code is doing is actually threefold. First, you have the stars that are constantly there, they're constantly twinkling, constantly doing their thing. Then the Aurora is also always playing. And then when you play a note, Kontakt doesn't do transparency, so you can't do something like if you play something, then reduce the opacity of a controller or a slider or whatever. But what it can do is shift very quickly between one image that is full opacity and different layers or different versions of that image that decrease in opacity. And so when you play a note, you have a little cover or a little copy of the background that is slowly losing opacity as you press the notes. And that's essentially how you get this fake fading in effect, which works very nicely, I think. And that's how we got here. That's how we got to the final product. That's how we got to the final sample library of Aurora Wisps of the Northern Lights. Thank you very much for watching this video and sharing this process with me. All of your support and subscriptions and thumbs up is super helpful, and I really appreciate that you keep doing that. And I do enjoy your thoughts and comments in my videos as well, so thank you very much for that. If you go to the new Smokestack Sounds website, you can check out Aurora and other instruments over there. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you on the next video. Bye, everyone.